The New York Islanders host the Florida Panthers tonight at the UBS Arena. We have a special crossover episode with Armando Velez of Locked On Panthers. We'll talk about both teams' seasons so far, and what he has to say about the Islanders may surprise you as we break down both teams, where they're at and where they are building to. We have all that and more coming up on this episode of the Locked On Islanders podcast.
Your Locked On Islanders, your daily podcast on the New York Islanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to this crossover edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast and the Locked On New York Islanders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers and Locked On New York Islanders podcast your first listen of the day. For everybody on the New York Islanders feed, let me introduce myself. My name is Armando Velez. I'm from PantherParkway.com and very pleased to be chatting with the host of Locked On New York Islanders, Gil Martin. Gil, how are you, man?
I'm good. Armando, how are you?
I'm doing well. And for the people on the Locked On Panthers feed, if this is a familiar voice that you're hearing of Gil, Gil does host the Monday and the Friday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, where of course you've probably heard my voice on that show here and there. And Gil, it's great to be chatting about both our teams on the not national level, talking as far as the show. So let's just get right into it. The New York Islanders, they've had a very tough season. 13 straight games on the road to start the season due to building their new arena in Belmont Park. Splits. I was looking up a lot of the splits. 5, 10, and 5 through the first 20 games. Points percentage of .375. But the last 55, their points percentage at .582. A 95-point pace from the last 55 games. Of course, if you're looking at the standings right now, they're a lot they would have been a lot closer to making the playoffs, but still come up a little bit short about how their last 55 games have been. I mean, they were just recently eliminated on Sunday night against the Toronto Maple Leafs. So my question is, who's been the most disappointing player on the New York Islanders, but also, despite not making the playoffs, who's been the most encouraging player on the Islanders this year?
I'll take the second one first. I think the most encouraging player has been Ilya Sarokan. And, you know, he's been an all-star in the KHL, but this is really his second NHL season. And the first year he's gotten the majority of the starts. And, you know, the .927 save percentage, the .231 goals against average, the 7 shutouts, he has really showed that he is more than capable of being a number one goalie in this league. And that opens up a lot of possibilities for the New York Islanders. As far as most disappointing, unfortunately, that would be a pretty long list if you go down where the Islanders are at as compared to where they were expected to be. I'm going to go with Kyle Palmeri, who has 14 goals and 31 points in 62 games. They signed him to replace Jordan Eberle and be on that number one line. He hasn't really worked out there, and having 1 point every other game is not the kind of production you want from a top 6 forward. There are a lot of other legitimate candidates for most disappointing, but I'm going to go with Palmeri as my first choice.
Yeah, and Kyle Palmeri traded to the New York Islanders from the New Jersey Devils in last trade deadline, a move that really earned Lou Lamoriello the GM of the year last year in 2 straight conference finals for the New York Islanders. These two teams, the Florida Panthers and the New York Islanders, they faced each other just 2 years ago in the Stanley Cup bubble. Semyon Varlamov was outstanding, but also the defense of the New York Islanders was outstanding as well. Just looking back at those game logs prior to our recording, the Florida Panthers didn't even get up to 30 shots on goal on Semyon Varlamov, let alone challenge him. Only gave up 3 goals once, and that was in their one and only game that they one. So with Semyon Varlamov, there was rumors about him possibly being traded. I mean, there's a 7-year age difference between Varlamov and Sarokan. So it looks like that Sorokin's going to be the guy, a former third-round pick for the Isles, and then how he's developed into being that number one. Even though after this year, Varlamov will be a UFA in 2 years, what's it looking like as the future for Semyon Varlamov?
Lou Lamoriello, he's very good at keeping things close to the vest, but what he has said publicly is that he would prefer to keep Semyon Varlamov. You need 2 goalies in this day and age. It's very hard with the 82-game schedule to get away with having just one legitimate goalie. But I wonder, it makes more sense. He has a $5 million cap hit. That's a very big cap hit for even a 1B kind of a goalie, even if you don't want to call him a backup. I think the Islanders could save $2-3 million in cap space, get something back for Varlamov, bring in, a backup goalie who they could pay $2 million a year, let's say, to play 30 games as opposed to, 40 that Varlamov is doing, and fill the 2 needs this team really has right now, and that is a puck-moving defenseman and a sniper. I mean, this team doesn't have too many legitimate 30-plus goal scorers on their roster, and if they could bring in that guy to team with Matthew Barzal on the top line, I think you're making this team that much better.
Yeah, and just seeing some of the numbers for the Islanders. Brock Nelson is almost at 40 goals, 34 goals. Anders Lee, welcome back to the captain, Anders Lee, as well, bouncing back after an injury-riddled season last year. But outside of that, it hasn't really been there for the New York Islanders. We all know this Islanders team as a defensive team, but just the offensive firepower these last 2 seasons. I mean, there's only so much you can do. As much as I was rooting for the New York Islanders against the Tampa Bay Lightning, of course, 2 straight
Shocker.
seasons. But when, of course, the lack of scoring and going up against someone like Andrei Vasilevsky, it's going to be really hard to defeat. And it's crazy because they even got to a Game 7 just 2 years ago as well. But I heard you talk about on your show yesterday about Mike Bossie. I listened to your episode, but just for a minute or two, to the Florida Panthers fans who heard about Mike Bossie's passing, tell them what Mike Bossie meant to the Islanders and the dynasty years that was for the Islanders in the early 80s.
Yeah, I mean, Mike Bossie, one of the best pure goal scorers I've ever seen in the NHL. And he joined the Islanders in 1977-78. And they went from a very good team that had a sort of outside chance of winning a Stanley Cup to a team that was a legitimate Stanley Cup contender. And by his second season with the team, they would have won the President's Trophy if it existed back then, but it hadn't come into existence just yet. But here is a guy who in 10 NHL seasons went over 50 goals 9 times. And the only time he didn't top 50 goals in a season, he only played, 63 games, I think it was, because of a bad back, and he had like 38 goals. So here's a guy who just had a very quick release, a very accurate shot, and sort of took the Islanders' offense to the next level when he joined the team and ended up, winning Rookie of the Year his first year, Calder Trophy, won a Conn Smythe Trophy when the Islanders won one of their 4 cups, and really just sort of solidified their offensive credentials, I guess, from that point forward.
Yeah, Mike Bossie, an Islanders legend, number 22, holding onto the rafters there at UBS Arena. One final question before we transition over to the second segment of the show. How are fans receiving the new UBS Arena? Late into the season for the Florida Panthers to be making their one and only visit there. But how are the fans receiving that new place, the new barn?
The new arena has been mostly positive responses. I mean, parking has been an issue because the parking lots weren't completely finished. They were still doing some work. So there were shuttle buses, but those are logistical things that will be hopefully worked out over time. But the sight lines are really good. It's a noisy building, just like the old Coliseum was, and that's always important. And I think the atmosphere, it's starting to take on its own atmosphere. A little winning would give it a little bit more personality and history, but that'll come in time, hopefully.
Yeah, and 13 straight road games to start the season as they were starting their season, getting ready for the arena to be finished. We're likely going to see that same situation next year with the Arizona Coyotes as they're looking into getting into their new arena, and that's just really hard on players. And of course, next year with the schedule set up, the Islanders will probably be in a better position that they're not worn out from all the road games that they had, and just the mental aspect of it. The players and Barry Trotz won't make those excuses, but I can make the excuse for them for the Islanders. It takes a big toll on a team when you start off with that.
It does, and you also have to know that, like, sometimes for a team like the Islanders, you could have road games at the Rangers or at the Devils where it's not that big of a trip. Even the Flyers is like a bus ride, but these were not those kind of trips. The Islanders were off to Western Canada and off to St. Louis and all these other places that were not close by. In fact, I think there was a Florida and Tampa Bay trip in that. So, they didn't have the 1 hour train ride or even the 1 hour flight to Boston or Washington. These were road games, that involved a lot of travel.
Yeah, they actually saw the Florida Panthers twice during that 13 game 13-game road trip to start this season. So definitely we're likely going to see a different Islanders team this time around in their third and final matchup of the season. But we're going to transition over to the next segment where Gil is going to talk to me about ask me Florida Panthers related questions. But first, we're going to tell you all about BetOnline. And BetOnline is your number one source for all your sports betting stats and info. Find all the latest sports development, league reviews, and news, including this year's basketball playoffs and Stanley Cup playoffs and the start of the Major League Baseball season. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information from live betting, playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Continuing on this crossover edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast and the Locked On New York Islanders podcast. So now I'm going to give Gil the floor on this segment of this crossover edition.
All right. Well, first of all, Armando, I mean, your team is looking pretty darn good. 114 points already in the conversation for the President's Trophy. What would you say is the one biggest factor in this team's success, even considering the fact that they had to change coaches midseason?
Balanced scoring. That's really, it's more than just the one line now. And it's funny because I mentioned in the last segment about how the Florida Panthers and the New York Islanders team faced off against each other, but also what comes down to where the Florida Panthers faced the Islanders to now, there's so much turnover on this roster. I mean, just looking at the roster that the Florida Panthers had in just 2019, 2020 year, just a few names to list out: Henrik Borgstrom, Brian Boyle, Josh Brown, Brett Connolly, Evgeny Dodonov, Eric Holla, Mike Hoffman, who was the leading scorer in that series. And I'm not going to name all of them, but like more than half of that has been turnover. I mean, that was Coach Q's first season, of course, changing coaches, GM in the second year of Coach Q's tenure, right before he was let go, and just creating that balanced score. I mean, Sam Reinhart, when he was originally traded to from the Buffalo Sabres to the Florida Panthers, he started off game one on that top line with Alexander Barkov and Carter Verhaeghe. Within a period, he was shifted down and Anthony Duclair was back on that top line. And it's been really, and Sam Reinhart hasn't really had too many top 6 minutes since, really. Here and there, spot times, but he's been now on that third line on that right wing, along with Anton Lundell and Mason Marchment. Mason Marchment was just a great find by the former GM of the Panthers, Dale Talon, But this coaching staff has been able to implement Mason Marchment's game as one of the leading scorers per 60 minutes. Mason Marchment. So the little bit amount of ice time that Marchment gets, he's producing. And of course, he had a beautiful backhand assist as he was drawing to the outside. Moritz Seider was covering him. He gets it to Sam Reinhart, speeds through the zone as the trailer, and then gets one in as well. And just it's been different contributors. The fourth line just the other day was just finding ways to score as well. So it's been balanced scoring outside of Jonathan Huberdeau and Alexander Barkov. It's been the Reinhardts, it's been the Bennetts, it's been the Duclairs, who now has more than 30 goals for the first time in his career after jumping from different teams. And it's just been improved goaltending from Sergei Bobrovsky. It's not exactly where the Florida Panthers want to be in the goaltending department, but there's a better feeling this year going into the playoffs than it is last season.
One guy who I always thought it was a little underrated nationally, at least, is Mackenzie Wieger. Talk to me a little bit about his contributions to this team.
Oh yeah, he's always taking the puck away and creating something going the other way, and that is your top pairing defenseman, playing top line minutes, 7th round pick, 6 picks away from the last pick, and he's always creating turnovers going the other way. And of course, Mackenzie Wieger has made a lot of mistakes as well, turning it over to the other team as well here and there, but has really made up for it for creating takeaways as well. Him and Anton Lundell at one point, before Anton Lundell went down for an extended period, those two were two of the top 3 players in all of the NHL in takeaway. The only other player there at the time was Alec Martinez of the Vegas Golden Knights, but then he had his injury as well. So there was a point where they were both in the top 3 as far as takeaways. And just when you get out of the zone and you dump the puck as well, and you're using the speed to your advantage, getting good zone entries as well, that really creates for a lot of opportunities up front.
No doubt about that. Look, goaltending is always a big key in the playoffs. You need a hot goalie if you're going to go on that long run. Sergei Bobrovsky, he's looked very good at times not quite as good. But one thing I like looking at the numbers, he's played 49 games. He hasn't been overworked. And Spencer Knight, his numbers are almost as good as Sergei Bobrovsky's. How do you view the goaltending situation for the Florida Panthers heading into the playoffs? And where do you think the coaching staff, do you think they'll go exclusively with Bobrovsky? Do you think won't hesitate to put Knight in if they feel Bobrovsky is struggling a little bit? Where do you see this team going?
It's Bobrovsky's net until said otherwise right now. Spencer Knight has been up and down between the AHL and the NHL. That's the luxury of a player being on their ELC when they're struggling. And that was that happened mostly throughout the December and January. Got a few shutouts in AHL Charlotte, and then he got his first shutout right before the trade deadline on the road game against Anaheim. And he's just been a lot better since coming back. And Bobrovsky, he was 3rd star of the month in the month of March too. And there was a 16-day period there where Bobrovsky missed time because while he was on the bench and Spencer Knight was starting in LA, Bobrovsky took a puck to the face and missed about a week. And Bobrovsky also missed about a week in November as well. And here's the difference between those different injuries that Bobrovsky missed a week for, at least, extended period at least. Spencer Knight struggled the first time around in November, but then the second time around when Bob got hurt, Spencer Knight did a lot better. So that's why that raises the question of whether Spencer Knight could be the guy or not. And at the time when the first go round, people were wondering if the Panthers should trade for a goaltender. And of course, goaltenders take a lot of time to develop. You see one in New York right now with Sarokan being drafted in the 3rd round. And of course, with a 1st round pick, there's a lot of expectations, but also with a big $10 million cap hit for the other goalie, there's big expectations. So there's big expectations for both goalies. And of course, with the better seasons that they're having, and also the Panthers aren't allowing too many shots on goal going the other way. They're controlling the possession, and most of the time they're spending in their own offensive zone. There are times where they'll outshoot the opposition by over 15 in a period. So they're taking a lot of pressure off their goalies. They're blocking a lot of shots as well. They're creating transition opportunities the other way. So that the defense is a lot better in front of the goalie, and the goalies are responding to that as well.
So one last question I have for you for this segment. Give me one player who is sort of flying under the radar who you think could be a key contributor toward a long playoff run for the Panthers.
It has to be Sam Reinhart for me, because half of his goals have come on the power play, and he's never scored 30 goals throughout his time in Buffalo. And just that guy who I've been calling a pest in front of the net for Sam Reinhart, and he's just been incredible, and he's just and he's playing third line minutes with a rookie Anton Lundell and Mason Marchment. That is if you're going to win a Stanley Cup, it can't just be those two lines for the Panthers. It's going to be adding that third line, having a good top nine as well for the Cats. And Sam Reinhart has definitely been a good influence on someone like Anton Lundell, just 20 years old. And Anton Lundell as well. That's another player. He missed 15 games and he's almost at 20 goals. He's a few goals away from getting 20. So he's definitely contributing. And another honorable mention as well. Anthony Duclair as well. I know it's easy to say Barkov, Huberdeau, and Claude Giroux, which Claude Giroux has 16 points in 13 games, but only 3 of them have been goals. But Anthony Duclair as well, using his speed to create opportunities. And of course, when Barkov has the puck, a lot of players get guilty of puck watching. And then before you know it, like what happened in Sunday against Detroit, Barkov gets a cross-ice pass, and then Anthony Duclair converts on a one-timer, and nobody picks him up. And even Alex Nedeljkovic couldn't draw to his left fast enough. So that's the luxury of having Barkov on your same line. He makes other players better.
Always a key, especially come playoff time. Before we get to the third segment, wanted to talk to you about Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. So why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning and wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing only the brand that their warehouse happens to carry? You have computers with access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket. Save time and money when using Rock Auto. Why choose to spend 30, 50, even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or car dealership? Rock Auto is a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years, and they have everything you could need: brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, even a new carpet. Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Right, Locked On in there. How did you hear about us box so they know we sent you? Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com.
And welcome into this final segment of this crossover edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast and the Locked On New York Islanders podcast. By the way, the Florida Panthers did practice today at UBS Arena, but there is no word on who the goaltender will be for the Florida Panthers yet. We'll find out during a morning skate. Spencer Knight does turn 21 years old at midnight when this recording drops. George Richards of Florida Hockey Now did tweet saying he might party a little bit, so he's going to assume that it's going to be Bob tomorrow. So a good point by George Richards there on who might or might not start for the Panthers. But I saw that Semyon Varlamov might be sick for the New York Islanders, so it looks like it's going to be Ilya Sarokan again for the Islanders, who started in the first 2 games of this season series, was pulled after the third period in the second go round for the Islanders. But for this segment, I was talking with Jack Bushman, the host of Locked On Blackhawks, when we did our crossover, talking about the 4 stages of building a contender. Even though right now for the New York Islanders, they're not making the playoffs this year, I still think, even though they can still get a more goal scoring to help them out and to help their defense on the other side. The Florida Panthers at one point were the opposite. They were scoring a lot of goals but not defending well. I still think New York is at the 3rd stage of building a contender. And I don't think this is a hot take at all, Gil. But if the New York Islanders let Barry Trotz go after this season, they are crazy for doing it. He will be hired right off the bat by another team. And I think despite the circumstances this season, I think Barry Trotz's job is safe in New York.
I think so too. First of all, Lou Lamoriello's not about to let him go. So, I mean, Lou is sold on Barry Trotz, and understandably so. The resume speaks for itself. Stanley Cup winner. What is he, 3rd or 4th all-time winner among coaches in the regular season? I don't blame Barry Trotz for what happened this year. You sort of had a perfect storm with the 13-game road trip, and then to start the season, and then you're playing games where you have 7, 8, 9 players out of the lineup because of COVID in November and into early December. You take away those games, as you said at the opening of the season, the Islanders are fighting tooth and nail for a playoff spot. So overall, I think, again, just a couple of tweaks here and there next year, and I think this Islander team can be right back in the hunt. And one of the advantages that the Islanders have come playoff time is they play a playoff style of hockey under Barry Trotz all year long. There's really not an adjustment. A lot of teams, they play a more offensive style during the regular season, and then come May, they all of a sudden want to play a different style. The Islanders play the same style all year round. It is a defense-first playoff style hockey. This team is built for that, and I think that Lou Lamoriello knows the little things he needs to do to make things better. But I agree, Barry Trotz is pretty safe right now.
Yeah, and Lou Lamoriello has a little bit to work with a lot of the defense core right now for the New York Islanders. A lot of them are hitting UFA status, so they have a little bit of cap space to work with. Not too much. Some don't have that many, so the Lou Lamoriello is going to work with what he's got to see, including 45-year-old Zdeno Chara. As far as the trade deadline, the New York Islanders seem to have a quiet trade deadline, and it's funny because Lou Lamoriello, I was reading an article. I'm like, how he doesn't like the term buyers or sellers because it's disrespectful to other teams. And I never really actually thought about that because these players go to the rink every day. No, players don't tank. That's just the truth. Players don't. So it's just a different perspective of seeing like how team building is and how hard it is to build a contender, especially when you made the Eastern Conference Finals two straight years, and then you have 1 year where it's just not working out 1 year.
Yeah, it is tough when that happens, but it was sort of a perfect storm, and I think you have to take stock of what's on your roster. And I don't think this team needs to be stripped down and built back up. I think they need to be tweaked just a little bit here and there, and I think that would make a big difference coming up next year. What about your situation? I mean, you guys are at the pinnacle right now, one of the best teams by record in the league. First of all, how important is a long playoff run for the psyche of this team?
It's very important, and Eastern Conference Final is the minimum for, at least for my expectations. But the hard part about where the Florida Panthers are at right now is the amount of draft capital they gave up in the most recent trade deadline. A 2023 first for Ben Sherratt, a 2024 first for Claude Giroux, and of course Owen Tippett going the other way. Tyson Milanich going to Montreal in the Sherratt trade. But of course, getting Frank Vatrano, trading Frank Vatrano for an asset to create ammunition for another trade. using Aaron Ekblad's LTIR space to get a 6th-round pick out of it as well. But this is the year to do it because not only did you give up that much draft capital, but the players you brought in for a long playoff run, those are expiring deals. There's rumors about Claude Giroux possibly going to Ottawa this offseason. Who knows what's going to happen with Ben Sherratt. And the thing that is clouding over the Florida Panthers if they don't win the Stanley Cup is they don't have that much cap space to work with the majority of Keith Yando's buyout being on the books next year. So that means that this is the time to do it because, of course, they have a lot of players still under term. Carter Verhaeghe is making $1 million this year, but next year it's going to jump up to over $4 million next year. So that he's getting paid. Alexander Barkov's first year of his 8-year deal kicks in next year at $10 million. Huberdeau will still have 1 more year on his contract before he gets extended. So you're thinking about the cap situation there. Of course, Sergei Bobrovsky will still be on the books for 4 more years after that. Aaron Ekblad, which as well, 3 more years for Aaron Ekblad, but his cap hit is great for what the Florida Panthers are working with. But it just really comes down to the money situation for the Panthers. If they don't win this year and they are trying to make moves to create cap space next year, it's going to have to come at a cost of Brandon Montour or Patrick Hornquist and all. But I think they might move them anyway, even if they win, to try to run it back. But if they don't, those are likely going to be the players who are going to be gone from this team next year.
It's going to be interesting, and I think you guys have a real chance, the Panthers, to make that long run and maybe even win their first Stanley Cup.
Yeah, and definitely, not a single playoff series since 1996, and a few playoff appearances in between. Their drought of 10 years of not making the playoffs was recently broken by the Buffalo Sabres. So that's something not over their franchise anymore. So you got that. You don't have that record anymore. So now, can you win a playoff series? It's helping that they're on their way to the number 1 seed in the East. Their magic number right now is 5 to get the number 1 seed. They could get it as early as maybe Thursday against Detroit at home. It'll be like a week left, and Andrew Brunette doesn't show any signs of slowing down. He's laser focused. He's always saying the right things based on not looking at standings. He says he doesn't look at standings. So he's just very focused on the task at hand and just taking it one game at a time. I mean, he's also trying to get the interim tag taken off as well, which I've said many times on this podcast that right now is not the time to try to take off the interim tag or not. Let this season play out. And I believe it'll happen either way, but just let it ride out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, as of right now, I'd say he's deserving, but obviously the playoffs are going to be the key.
Absolutely, and win a round. If he wins 1 round, I think he's staying. But of course, the expectation is to go further and further.
Yeah, as well it should be.
Absolutely. But Gil, I want to thank you so much for doing this crossover with me on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. For my listeners, tell them where they can find you and your work online.
Well, Locked On Islanders, wherever you get podcasts, and also on YouTube. And then, of course, you can follow me on Twitter at IceWarsNYR_VSNYI.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gil. And for everyone on the New York Islanders feed, you can find me on Twitter at MondoMan12. Follow the show account at LO_FLA Panthers. And you can find Locked On Panthers anywhere you listen to podcasts on Apple, Google, Spotify, Odyssey, and YouTube as well. So thank you so much, Gil, once again for doing this.
Thank you. All right, that's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Islanders podcast. Thank you for making Locked On Islanders your first listen every day. Now make your second listen Locked On Fantasy Hockey. Hosts Steele Roden and Flip Livingstone help you become the expert of your fantasy league. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. We will be back tomorrow. We'll have our key takeaways from this game against the Panthers and a whole lot more. I want to thank Armando for joining us today and doing this crossover episode. Have a great day, everybody. Stay safe. And of course, let's go Islanders.